So, chapter 5 of the Youth Flexibility Manual, we are going to go over sort of the guidelines of how to implement this flexibility protocol, the program design that's related to it. We want to talk about the rationale for why it's so important. That's going to be in the beginning. Then we'll get into some of those guidelines. We'll talk about the flexibility for options for youths. But remember, we are sort of like restructuring this lecture not to only be youth specific. We are going to talk about adult flexibility guidelines as well. So youths are obviously growing very, very, very quickly. And so one of the things that sort of comes along with like growing is that it kind of it results in adjustments in your proprioception, right? So just as a reminder, if you don't remember, proprioception is that your body's spatial awareness, right? It's your body's ability to understand what position it's in space. Like, you know, if you were playing, I don't know if you guys remember playing Battleship when you were a kid, or maybe as an adult, I don't know your life. But the way like Battleship works is like you kind of try it around, and then you kind of find like you're like, oh, that was a hit, okay, and you kind of try to assume like where the rest of that ship is going to be, right? And you use your knowledge from like the last time you successfully got like a point, you know, to get the next one, right? Well, that's how your brain works. That's how proprioception is, right? Your brain is basically, it knows how flexible your muscles are, or at least it thinks it does. We'll get into that in a second. It knows like how long your limbs are, and it knows what it had to do last time to create like a specific movement. So like if, you know, my brain is telling my deltoid muscle here to contract for, you know, you know, let's say, I don't know what percentage my empty arm would be compared to like, you know, doing like a heavy lateral raise. But let's say it's like we need to contract it 1.5% of the strength, right, to raise my arm up to here. And this muscle needs to go from being this long to this long, not this long, but this, you know, like it has like all these sort of specific things that it remembers as it does things. It logs that information away, and that's sort of like what we mean when we say muscle memory. Muscle memory isn't it's not your muscles actually have memories, you know, you don't have a brain inside your muscles, you know. But proprioception is something that we do have. It's this concept of like our body does understand where it is in space based on like all the things that it has been exposed to previously, right? So when you you know, learn how to do like a specific movement, your brain will sort of log that information away, and it'll use that information right later. So flexibility training is part of this because we want to make sure that we're teaching the brain how to move a muscle through its complete range of motion, so that we sort of like continually tell our brain, hey, we can move through this complete range of motion safely. Because one of the things about your muscles that's kind of a bummer is the fact that like you know, as you try to move a muscle through like a complete range of motion, if that muscle maybe has like a little bit of scar tissue, or if it has like a node in it where it's like nervous about like releasing some fibers, it'll spasm up. And that spasm is because your muscle thinks that if it gets to a full range of motion, it's going to tear. Like it thinks that like, oh, if I fully extend my arm here, the bicep is going to tear. So what I'll do is I'll just keep it kind of half cocked, right? I'll keep it like under contraction. If I can do that, right, it'll protect like this section of fibers here, and it won't get pulled apart and won't experience like a pulled muscle or a tear of some type, right? That's sort of the like what's going on biologically when you feel like a tight muscle that just really won't loosen up. A lot of times it's your nervous system trying to protect that muscle, but unfortunately what it's doing is it's kind of causing more harm than anything, because now what ends up happening is you can't move that muscle through a full range of motion. So your body maybe recruits some other muscle to get the job done. And then now you're dragging your skeleton through like a range of motion that it's not really designed to move through. This is often what causes some type of like overuse injury, right? And so like that's definitely not great. So we're trying to establish proper movement patterns at a very, very young age, because that is going to tell the nervous system, hey, I'm supposed to be able to move through this full range of motion, and I can move through this full range of motion safely. So then as we sort of like train for that as a youth, right, our body remembers that it can move through that, and then we move much more naturally. And here's what's kind of cool about this. This whole time I've been talking about like how this is like a developing nervous system. We're trying to teach the body how to do this, right? This applies to adults, right? Like I could take like somebody who's never worked out a day in their life. They may have got like a slew of muscle imbalances. I'm not saying I can take like a 60-year-old person and turn them into like a yoga expert at, you know, like that somebody who's never like done any physical activity before and is like really tight, like hunched over. I'm not saying that like we can take that person and actually like, you know, turn them into like a gymnast level, like, yeah, they're doing like the splits and doing like a pancake on like the floor. Yeah, no, we're not doing something like that. However, mostly because like, by the way, you leave your muscles in a tight position, your bones start to grow in a certain, like that's not awesome. But like what I am saying is that like, you know, when we teach the nervous system, like, hey, guess what? I can move you through this range of motion safely and we don't tear and we don't get injured and like this is fine. Your muscles actually get more relaxed. And that's how, you know, we call it flexibility training, but we should kind of call it extensibility training. But that's how extensibility improves your flexibility, right? You're teaching your brain, you're teaching your muscles that like, hey, like we can extend through this full range of motion without tearing, without getting injured. We can do this very safely. The whole point of flexibility training is obviously to maintain this full range of motion within all of our joints. Obviously, that's great because we're going to be able to move very freely. It also reduces our risk of injury because of just like what I said. Remember, we got the kinetic chain here, right? We don't want our muscles to drag our skeleton around through ranges of motion that it's maybe not really designed for, you know? And it can also improve like sports performance. Obviously, like, you know, youths, what's important to them is oftentimes is like, you know, playing their sport well. And so like, we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to move through a full range of motion. The more flexible you are, the more that's going to help with it. And I know that there's some data out there that says like, oh, the more flexible you are, the less powerful you are. And there is sort of a correlation between like hypermobility and lack of power. But these are pretty extreme circumstances that are really not within the realm of what we're talking about today. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So not last night, the night before, I was doing yoga with my niece. She's 10 years old. And so I was kind of assisting her. And I found it very easy to stretch her, but I was afraid of overstretching her and hurting her
Sure.
because she was very trusting. But at
Yeah.
the same time, when I would give her direction to do like, a flat back, she was
Uh-huh.
flipped over like a turtle. And I couldn't get her to like do what I wanted her to do, but she was very flexible. So can you like overstretch a kid?
I mean, yeah, you certainly could. You know, anytime like, I mean, if you ever like, this is going to be horrifying to think about, but if you've ever deboned a chicken, you know, you take the leg through a joint and like you just pop it out of the joint, you know, like, yeah, obviously if you were to do something like that, like if there's just no resistance, like sure,
Right.
you could like honestly dislocate something
Mhm.
if you pull hard, but like the odds of like you getting to that range of motion before like that person's like, you know, and they pull back on you and like resist,
Right.
are very minimal, very, very low. So yes, physiologically it's possible. Are you going to probably ever run into it? I doubt it, you know. um, but yeah, that is one of the reasons why like we actually encourage the use of like static stretches with youths, and we encourage like dynamic stretches with youths. But we don't really do PNF stretching. We don't really do a lot of that assisted stretching stuff with early stage youths, just because not so much because we're actually that worried about like injuring them, but more because like they also can't really capitalize on it. They're already very flexible,
Mhm.
and then we need that contraction in a PNF stretch. And for those of you who don't know PNF stretching yet, you're going to get there in capstone. But like, you know, when we do that like contraction stuff, contracting doesn't work very well on youths because they don't really have a good contraction in order to sort of shut down the antagonist muscle. So I wouldn't necessarily do PNF with a kid, not because I'd be afraid to, but because I know it's just not probably it's just not going to be very effective.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of a risk. I mean, I'm not like a risk reward situation. It's a cost to gain. You know, it's like it would take time, and I'm not getting the most bang for my buck. So let's do something else. You know. So probably the biggest concept today, or the reason the big reason we as trainers even like look at flexibility, is we want to understand this idea of what we call relative flexibility. I've already kind of talked about this a little bit so far, but relative flexibility is your body finding the path of least resistance during a functional movement pattern. So relative flexibility is basically how your body learns how to do a movement the wrong way, because it could get the job done even if it's not necessarily supposed to move that way, right? So like, for instance, like we know that, like, you know, you look at like let's look at an infant, right? You look at like an infant like squatting down, it's perfect form. Like slap a barbell on these kids because they are crushing it. Like that squat looks better than mine. I love this picture. I keep seeing this picture pop up every time I say this. But like, look at this. Like, honestly, like what we look for in an effective squat. I'm literally going to use this kid as an example. What we look for in an effective squat, right? Knees are tracking directly over the second and third toe, right? Like, which is what we want, by the way. It's not over your big toe. There's an ever so slight angle out. And then like a perfectly flat back, the femurs at the same angle, like that's a parallel line, which is always what we're going for, by the way. Remember, we want that parallel line from like shin to knee and shoulder to hips, right? I mean, this isn't an overhead squat. This kid could definitely get their arms up a little better. But I think that's more of a coaching cue than anything. But it's perfect form, right? That is literally a range of motion we are super designed to be able to move through. And yet we lose it over time because we contract muscles like at certain, like for certain lengths of time. Like imagine like if you are, let's say you are constantly sitting with your wallet in your back pocket, right? This is a kind of a classic one that we'll run into sometimes, right? So you have a pretty sedentary job, or maybe you're like a driver, right? You ever see those like those guys? They always like my dad's a truck driver, so I would see this as a kid all the time. And my dad was never one of these people. He doesn't like to keep his wallet in his back pocket because he's like a driver, you know. Um, uh, but he'll keep it, but you'll see people who do, right? You'll see those, like, it's usually like somebody who does like a lot of driving, and they'll have like the perfect outline of their wallet and where it sits every day in their jeans. Like, it's so funny. Like, you know, even on time, like they'll take their wallet out, the picture's still there, you know, like, and it's like very clear that like that's where they keep it every single time. I remember my dad had a term for it. I've been trying to like the back of my brain think about it so I could say it right. He would call it something, and it was very funny. As a kid, I would, oh man. But anyway, but let's say you do that, right? Let's say you're one of those guys and you keep that wallet in the same spot. So now you got to remember, like, your pelvis can do a little bit of a lateral shift, right? So what ends up happening is you end up elevating one side of your pelvis, and then you end up dropping the other side of your pelvis. So let's take a look at like our, what's called our quadratus lumborum muscle. Okay, so this muscle right here, your QL, as it's much more commonly referred to. This is your quadratus lumborum. This is attached to, it's actually attached to your ribs. So it's actually like your body, your floaters is what we call them. The ribs here that don't have like a cartilaginous connection in the front, right? Like all these ribs hook around, the bottom two, not so much. And then it's also attached to these little spinal processes here as well. So what it's in charge of doing is this, right? It's in charge of like pulling you this way. So you see somebody do like side bends in the gym, they're working their QL, which I want to be clear here. I hate this exercise. I am like, this is on my list of super no-nos. I will use it if I've got a client with a really bad QL tilt. But for like an average client, never. And like people are like, oh, it works your obliques. It does not. And we will talk about that in kinesiology class. Get your obliques do this, not this. I mean, they do a little bit of that, but very, very little. So now let's go back to our person, right? They sit on their wallet all day. So they start to develop a really tight QL on, oh, there we go. There's like kind of a picture of the bed, right? They start to get a really tight QL on one side. So they put their wallet on their right side. So now this QL is in a contracted position all day. It's on their right butt, right? So now their right butt is elevated, their left butt drops. So this QL over here is being stretched. This QL over here is being shortened. So now we're going to develop a muscle imbalance. So there's not really very many muscles that actually look like this in your body at this. We'll do that one. Where's my picture? There it is. So there's not very many muscles that actually look like this, like where it's literally just like, you know, kind of pulling a bone at a specific angle like this. But you can see, right, like this bone is supposed to be sitting at 90 degrees, but there's the tight side over here and there's the loose side over here. So imagine if this, instead of just like a big long bone like this is just kind of a drawing. Imagine this was the spine. And we're talking about the QLs here. So this QL becomes lengthened and this QL becomes shortened, right? So what do I need to do? I need to loosen up this side of the QL. Now, obviously, I also need to strengthen this side. If I loosen up one side and I don't pull it back the other way, eventually it'll just tighten right back up. But like, that is what I mean when I say relative flexibility, right? Let's take a look at a scoliosis. So scoliosis is a lateral curvature of the spine. Now, sometimes you're born with this. I mean, oftentimes, actually, no, I'll bet there's way more. We call it a functional scoliosis if you develop it over time, versus like if you have an anatomic scoliosis, like you're born with it, right? Like this is like a young person. We usually see it in kids, right? This person was probably born, they just have like a little bit of a curvature in their spine. Could have been from just like the way they developed in the womb, could be from maybe slight calcium or vitamin D deficiency at an early age. And so like, but the spine sort of developed this lateral curvature, right? But here's the thing, man, you can develop a scoliosis by sitting on your wallet. Or by like, you know, it's very funny. There's a video I show in class of like a firefighter, and she's got they're breaking down her posture, and we're gonna watch it in two mods. But I worked with a firefighter, and it was exactly the same thing. They carry all their equipment over like one shoulder, and so that shoulder drops down all the time. So they get a scoliosis, and so what'll happen is you'll usually see it look like this. So here's like, this would probably be like a biologic scoliosis, right? This one as well. But over here, when I see like the double curve, I'm like, that's probably a functional scoliosis. That's a learned habit right there. So what ended up happening, like, let's say this lady here, she sits on her wallet over here. These QL muscles get really tight. These QL muscles get really short. So then what ends up happening? Your body goes, oh, well, since I'm going like this, I'll also raise this shoulder up and drop this shoulder down. And like the Jenga stack, I'll get back to neutral. And it'll, I take the block out over here, put it over there. And it's like, that's what your body does. So now you develop this like postural distortion, right? And now when you go to move, you experience like an ache or a pain, like a pinching in your hip or something. And it's like, why does my hip pinch? I'm trying to like raise my thigh up. What does that have to do with my back? And it's like, well, your pelvis is tilted like this. So now your femur is actually like rubbing in the socket, right? We got to remember that like the way our muscular system works, it drags our skeletal system around, right? Like our skeleton doesn't have any contractile abilities of its own, So how do we move it? Well, we got all these muscles that are literally just kind of dragging it around. So Relative flexibility is your body finding a way to get a job done, even if it's not necessarily meant to move that way, right? Man, look at that. I've had that covered up for a few minutes. I almost quoted myself perfectly. Remember in the sales class, I told you guys how you're going to get little scripts in your head. I say this too often, but this is like my way of putting relative flexibility. Like relative flexibility is your body finding the path of least resistance during move. I like to say it's your body getting the job done, even if it's not designed to get it done that way. So that leads to poor motor control because now you're using the wrong muscles to do the maybe whatever job, and altered movement patterns. The classic example of this, getting away from the QL here that we just talked about recently, let's take a look at our overhead squat compensations. So Cyrus, you got to see the overhead squat for the first time on Friday, right? Because we just introduced it in our assessments class. This is what we mean when we say relative flexibility. Like, why would your client squat like this or like this or like that or like that when they can squat properly? You know, it's like, why would you do it that way? The good way is this way. It's like they literally can't. Like their brain doesn't know how to do it, you know, because certain muscles are overactive. So let's take a look at this one here, right? This is an excessive low back arch, right? What's happening here are tight muscles in the front of the hip, like probably the hip. It's usually what's causing the problem, are rotating the pelvis down this way. And then tight muscles in the low back are pulling the spine out like this. Like your body realized, right? Let's look at, this isn't a scoliosis because a scoliosis is a lateral curvature. This is a sort of a frontal curvature, or a sagittal, I should say, curvature. But you see here, right? Actually, that's a great one. That's a good picture. So she's got this like major curve here. So now what ended up happening is like, you know, her body's got two options, right? If the pelvis sits at an angle like this, she can either walk around all day at an angle like that, right? Or she can just contract her upper back muscles and get upright. So now the tight muscles here are causing this extra curvature here. Or maybe the muscles in their low back got really tight and it started pulling the pelvis up this way. And then they would be like this all day. So then their pelvis was like, well, why don't we do this instead? And it tilted forward. So this muscle here and this muscle here, this is your low back, this is your hips, right? Those two muscles got really, really tight. And they are staying in a contracted position because they don't think they can stretch. They're that muscle that's really afraid to go to a full range of motion because maybe it's got maybe she got hit in the low back or something, and it caused like a spasm. Maybe she like tore her hip playing sports or something. Now, those are really extreme examples. What probably actually happened if somebody ended up like this is they had a job where they sat all day. When you sit all day, right? Let's look at sitting in a chair. What do you got for me for Google? What do you got when I ask you that? There's going to be some goofy pictures. My God, that lady dresses like my girlfriend. I'm pretty sure my girlfriend has that exact outfit. That's wild. Sorry. Here we go. Let's say, like, you know, look at this. The hips are in a flexed position and the pelvis is rotated forward. So if she leaned against the back of that chair, now she would be doing the low back arch as well, right? Again, it's an example of like form following function, right? We function like this all the time. You know what it does? It changes our form. It changes like how we look. It alters our posture. So that's how we get like this, right? We get a tight muscle on one side, we get a weak muscle on the other. Because here's the other part of the equation, and what we'll start looking at tomorrow. The tight hips on this side of the joint, we flip to the other side of the joint. Those muscles are weak, right? Because one muscle's pulling so hard, the other muscle's letting go. Why does it do that? Well, all your muscles are designed to do that, right? When I contract my bicep, my tricep lets go. When I contract my tricep, my bicep lets go. It's how your nervous system is arranged, right? Muscles can, remember, go back to our anatomy class on muscles. Muscles can only pull. They can pull and then they can relax back to their original length, but they can't push in the opposite direction. So how do you know, if you've got a really tight hip pulling you this way, how do you get it back to neutral? Well, you loosen it up for sure through flexibility training. You also contract this side. and that pulls it back. Now, here's what I'm dealing with literally today as well. Like I'm in the 7th circle of sore this morning. I have a low back rounding problem. It's exactly the opposite. Totally, like completely the reverse of the anterior pelvic tilt. Instead, this is the butt tucking, right? I always say this is like the scared dog posture. I call it old man butt. Like I'm actually, my parents love him. I'm not a huge fan because I think it's a little hokey, but like my parents love Jeff Foxworthy. They adore him. And I really liked it when I was a kid. But he had this joke where he was talking about like an old man's butt. And he was like, it's like a frog stood up and put on a pair of pants. There's nothing there. And that's kind of what's going on here, right? We see that it's called a posterior pelvic tilt because now the pelvis, instead of getting pulled this way, it's getting pulled this way, right? It's just that kind of like, Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, right? 100%. Oh, come on. Give me a lateral picture, please. Yeah, there we go. Right, he's tucking his butt. Look at him. Even this guy. And that's a real person. Perfect casting, by the way. So yeah, like I didn't know the casting director was an anatomist. But that's the posterior pelvic tilt, and that's exactly the opposite problem, right? So take a look, right? We can see these two different pelvic tilts, right? Here's a neutral spine. The pelvis is sitting relatively neutral. Now I will say it's actually supposed to sit kind of at a forward angle, just not this, right? Actually, you should have a slight anterior tilt minorly, but a major anterior, it looks like this, right? Hips pulling down, low back pulling up. Posterior, flat back posture, right? Old man butt, is actually the opposite. In this case, it's not the low back that's pulling too hard. In fact, the low back is really weak here. And it's not the hips that are pulling too hard. In fact, the hips are too weak here. Instead, it's the muscles that were weak in the other example, right? In this example, how do we fix that arch? We strengthen the abs. In this case, parts of the abdominals are actually pulling up on the pelvis from the front. Literally, your abdominals, your abdominal complex, which runs here. I'm gonna look at and it's particularly the rectus abdominis, the 6-pack muscles. This is your transverse abdominis. This is for stabilization. This doesn't move your spine. This one does, right? So it is attached to some ribs and the front of the pelvis right there. So if I were to contract this whole thing, it would pull the pelvis. It's grabbing the pelvis in the front, pulling it up, right? Again, tucking the butt. So it's the 6-pack that's overactive, and all the muscles that are supposed to stabilize in the core are underactive. Now, if you have a posterior pelvic tilt, that might make you think, oh, well, I guess my abs are too strong. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not. I mean, it's a little what I'm saying. Your 6-pack muscle is a little overdeveloped. Maybe you've just done way too many crunching motions, or more than likely, you sit in a chair like this, which is probably what actually happened, right? When you get that like slumper, and you curve your back this way, right? Your core, which is all of this, by the way, is not overactive. It's your rectus abdominis that's overactive. That's one muscle in many muscles of the core. I've had clients like try to be like, no, that's a good problem to have. And I'm like, no, it's not. There are no good problems to have when it comes to posture. And then it's tight hamstring muscles. Now you'll hear people sometimes say that a posterior tilt is caused by tight glutes as well. I disagree with that. I think it's strictly hamstrings, and a little bit. There's an adductor muscle in the middle called your adductor magnus. I think that one's also very overactive. So there we go. Opposite problems here, right? We see some tight muscles. Now remember, again, I'm only talking about the tight muscles today. Tomorrow I'm gonna spend all this time talking about like we have this tight thing over here, we got this loose thing over here. Do the opposite, right? That's what trainers do, right? I got a client with an anterior pelvic tilt. I'm going to stretch the low back. I'm going to stretch the hips. I'm going to strengthen the abs. I'm going to strengthen the glutes. Then we can go do the workout that they want to do, right? I'm going to work on the posture stuff in the beginning so that it recruits properly as we move through the workout. What about a client with an excessive forward lean? Guess what? That's actually almost the same as this one sometimes. It's really tight hips, but it manifests itself in a way where, like, if you put these two together, remember how I said this is tight hips and this is tight, like, abs as well, right? Tight hips, tight low back, tight hamstrings, tight abs, right? If you took the hips plus the abs, so both those are on the front side this time, and tighten them both up, that will give you an excessive lean. It pulls you down, right? Because your abdominals, which again, I mentioned, like your six-pack abdominals, not your core stabilizers. They're trying to like stabilize, but they're not designed to, right? They're designed to move your spine around. So when you say to somebody like, hey, strengthen your core, sometimes you'll see it. You'll literally like visually see somebody go, it's like, hey, tighten up your core. And they'll go, and they lean forward a little bit. It's like, ah, da, 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 da. No. Create abdominal like pressure. I don't mean contract your abs. I don't mean like do a crunch. You'll sometimes see it. Like you'll see it's like, and you'll always see it if you ever do. It's always a forward leaner. You'll see it all the time in forward leaners. So this is somebody who, like, let's say they bend down to pick up a pencil. They actually like squeeze their abs as they're going down because their brain is so used to using their abs for stuff like that, right? Rather than just stabilizing everything and squatting down or some other range of motion. Now, the other big reason, and I would say the more common reason we see an excessive forward lean, this is going to seem a little weird because I just got done talking about the hips, but the other big reason is actually tight calf muscles. Now that seems very unlikely because, like, what does this have to do with all this stuff up here? Your instincts are good, actually not a lot, but visually the way somebody squats ends up manifesting itself the same way. So if you have a tight calf, that limits your ankle's ability to bring your toe this way, right? So we have your calf muscle is in charge of plantar flexion, okay? Plantar flexion is when you point your toe away, right? That's a lot of plantar flexion, right? Ballerinas are crazy. Speaking of hypermobility, but yeah, that's plantar flexion, right? Whereas dorsiflexion is this one, it's pulling it back this way. So your shin muscles are in charge of this. Your calf muscles are in charge of that, right? So your calf, if it's always contracting, what ends up happening when you squat, let's take a look at the angle here. So when you're squatting, there's Aaron Horschig. This is my favorite guy, by the way. But when you're squatting, ideally your shin should come forward to the edge of your toes, sometimes even past your toes. I know that a million trainers for years have been saying, like, don't let your knees go past your toes. Don't let your knees go past your toes. That's a really quick, easy cue for body weight squats. It got very popular in group exercise and eventually worked its way to the gym. But it really doesn't belong in regular squat anatomy when we're talking about like posture. You can totally bring your knees past your toes. What if you have a really long femur? It's fine. Don't be as afraid of that. Now, obviously, knees over, your squat shouldn't look like this. It should definitely not. Come on, Google, help me out. Heels rise squat. Let's try that. There we go. It shouldn't look like this. Where it's like really, and it's because you're on your tippy toes, but that's a whole different problem. That's causing that. Yeah. That's a no butt squat. You'll see it sometimes where people are just like this because they know how to use their quads, but they don't know how to use their glutes. You'll sometimes see that like no butt, and their chest will be perfectly upright. But yeah, so a tight calf muscle, what ends up happening is because the shin can't travel forward, what instead happens is as they start to go down, the shin refuses to move this way because they can't dorsiflex because that calf muscle won't let go. So calf muscle won't let go. It causes this to stay at an upright angle, and they will literally feel like they're like, they feel like they're falling backwards. So how do you keep from falling backwards? You dump your chest forward, and now you're in balance, right? And that's what causes an excessive forward lean. You see it in barbell squatters all the time. And it's because of you see this kind of squat here. It's really tight, oftentimes really tight calf muscles. This is actually why they encourage people to train in Converse. Have you ever heard people say, or barefoot, so that you can get used to dorsiflexing your angle. But if you look at Olympic weightlifting shoes, you know, they call them platform shoes. Those shoes, like this guy should have taken a photo in different shoes for example A and example B. They actually have an elevated heel, and that heel elevation puts you into plantar flexion, which then makes it easier for your shin to travel forward by taking the stretch off your calf. I'm not anti-platform shoes at really high levels of barbell squatting, but I do think that if you are using it, yeah, see that guy's heels are popping up actually. I do think that if you are using it as a crutch, that's not something I'm a fan of. It's sort of the opposite of my opinion on weightlifting belts. Like I think everybody can use a weightlifting belt if you use it properly. Platform shoes, I think you should focus on the mobility first and then get to them later if you want to take advantage to have like a really solid base of support. Because what they are really great at is they're, you know, a hard plastic. You don't feel like you're shifting around in your shoes at all. At really high levels, that's a pretty valuable thing to have. And then lastly, we get the arms falling forward. And so we're out of the hips. And I've been doing a lot of hip stuff so far. And these are all just lateral views for now. But, you know, that's tight lat muscles and a tight chest and a really tight, maybe even neck musculature there, right? So, you know, now we have somebody who has a really hard time moving their shoulder through a full range of motion. So it just stays in this extended position instead all day, right? Not awesome, right? How do we loosen that up, right? What do we need to do? We need to loosen the chest up so that the chest will allow this full, you know, range of motion. We need to loosen the lats up so that, because your lat literally, it's in charge, like that's what your lat does, right? It pulls down this way. So if it's overactive, it won't release. Earlier, I said most anterior pelvic tilts are caused by the hips, and that is true. Sometimes you will see an anterior pelvic tilt in people with tight lats. So like usually tight lats results in this, where the arms just don't come up. But if they like, you know, let's say just sheer force of effort, they're like, I can get them up, and they just raise it. Oftentimes the way they'll compensate is they'll curve their low back. So they'll get it to here, and then they'll arch their back. And it's like, see, I got them up. And it's like, oh, you know, yes, kind of. Other distortions that we've got, obviously some of the most common other ones that we see are the feet turning out. I think that was my example on Friday, so I won't rehash that too much. But again, tight calf muscles, right? And weak knee stabilizers. This is so pixelated. Let me pick a different one. Come on, Google, help. There we go. This will work. And then here's the other one, right? The knees caving in. That's also very pixelated, but right. So now that's like another compensation. So why are the knees caving in? Well, weak glute muscles, tight calf calf. I teach anatomy. Tight adductor muscles, tight inner thighs, right? And then there are tight calves actually out here, and there's a tight hamstring actually. That seems kind of weird. You wouldn't think the hamstring out on the lateral side would cause the knee to cave in, but that hamstring actually does rotation of this tibia here, and that's actually why that's happening. So basically when they squat, this hamstring muscle is pulling, and it's causing the tibia to rotate this way, which is why the feet often turn that way as well. And then that screws up your foundation, which then causes this knock-kneed posture. And then the adductor's like, well, we can help. If we're going to pull the knees in, we'll get involved. And so then the adductors come in as well. All right, so that was a lot. Obviously, I didn't have you write any of that down, but I just want to give you a plethora of examples as to like what's causing this relative flexibility, right? It's like, you know, It's like, hey, do me a favor, give me 15 squats, right? And then your client goes, okay, yeah, sure. And they do them like this, just knees buckling in, feet turning out, right? And then they get through all 15. They're like, I did it. And it's like, it's like you did something very similar to a squat. Like, you did the relative flexibility version of a squat. It's like you were flexible relative to how your muscles were able to move. Your body found the path of least resistance to get the job done. It's not necessarily how we're supposed to move. Does that make sense, everybody? Any questions? Anybody hear their postural distortions in there? And have a question about that where you're like, that's me. How do I fix that? Anybody on that one?
No, but I have a question. What do you do to help somebody fix like the QL tightness on one side?
Panda butt. So two things. So the stretching approach is like a just child's pose. Walk those hands over to one side. It's a really good one. And also a lot of times a tight QL can also screw up your piriformis. So I would also say a piriformis stretch on that side as well will be very helpful. Like this one here. I do like this one. This is the modified version. If they can handle it though, my favorite is this one. But see the QL there, right? So there's a little bit of an advanced stretch. If they can't really handle that, instead you go with this. And if they can't handle that one, you go with this one. Oh, Lord. Hold on one second. That's not what I want to see. Oh, okay, that's fine. So that's a really good one. I would also say, and then yeah, like a QL stretch is going to be like some version of a hip drop. You'll sometimes see people do this version here, and they'll take this leg back. My favorite is child's pose. Just take child's pose and just walk those hands over to one side, like that, and just literally just walk them. Now, I don't like this version. It is stretching the QL for sure, but I think if they do have QL problems, oftentimes they don't have the core stability to stay upright, so they'll dump, and then like that's causing all kinds of other problems. If they don't have any other problems, and it's literally just if they maybe they like got hit or something, they're playing sports, and like they're normally very athletic, but they have a tight QL, today or tomorrow. Yeah, this one's great. You know what I mean? But I don't like it for people who have like chronic QL problems. Now, the next thing you can do on the strengthening approach, just because I'm probably not going to get to talk about this tomorrow, I'll talk about it now, is what was that exercise called? Towel list exercise. Oh, what is this called? God dang it. Close. Also close. There we go. I'm getting there. 1 second. I will find this exercise. But the strengthening stuff I would do is very similar to this. Or very similar to that. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of this freaking movement. Basically what you do, Arlene, if you got somebody who's like, let's say they shift to their left, right? So what you do is you would roll up a towel. You can even use like a little half foam roller, and you cock it under the arm here. And what that does is like, if they're shifting this way, right? That is like, what's going on there is like this hip's coming over here, and then their body's going back this way. So it creates this like See how like my upper body went this way, but my lower body went this way, or like it went this way and this way, right? That's a scoliosis. So it'll dump here, and then the body will come back in the other direction, and it'll get this curvature, right? Oh, that's actually bleh. So what you do, right? Take a towel, wrap it, and put it between their arm like this, and have them go up to a wall. And then they're literally going to put their shoulder into the wall, and they're going to push their hips across like this. And what will happen is this towel here is going to push their upper body this way, and they're kicking their hip that way. And so you just do reps like that, and it will get them back to neutral. It'll train their spine to get back to neutral.
It'll straighten them out.
What's that?
It'll straighten them out.
Yeah, you're literally going. I'm so sorry. I can't think of the name of that. So you'd be able to Google it, but I can't find the dang thing. There's actually, and I hate linking his videos. This is my least favorite YouTuber. The Athlete X guy. He's got a pretty good one. I think it's in this bulging disc video. I disagree with most of this video, but he does have a very, very, very good demo in that video. Student sent it to me once, and I've never forgotten it because I was like, oh no, now I have to, link the Athlete X guy. I actually like Jeff Cavalier. I think he's got a good personality. I just think that his approach to like anything to get the job done fitness is what I like to call it, where it's like you can use a cheat rep and it's fine. I don't like. But before I get any more controversial on that, we're moving on. So relative flexibility, very dangerous for us. Poor motor control, increased risk of injury, because again, you're dragging your skeletal system around the wrong way. So the example in the book, in the PowerPoint here and in the book, these are the ones that everybody, this is the one NASM always goes to because it's probably the most common. Like, honestly, I don't think there's a person out there at this point in the world that doesn't have tight calves, unless they're like, their parents are like, one of those, those people who are obsessed with the Vibram shoes, the toe shoes. And it's like they've been dressing their kid in those since they since they were like at a young age, or maybe the kid's never worn shoes before. I think everybody's got tight calves in some capacity, right? Other than that kid. So we see like an example here, right? This is externally rotated feet. Why are they externally rotating? Well, the calf muscles are pulling harder than they're supposed to. Maybe they twisted their ankle one day, like playing sports. Maybe they just wear a shoe with an elevated heel all the time, right? They just wear like, I hate to say it, but honestly, like basketball shoes, I'm not a huge fan anatomically. They're great for like reducing the impact on your heel. But if you just stay off your heel the whole time, I think we'd be in a better spot. But, look at the freaking padding on these things, right? What that's doing is it's taking a flat foot and it's putting it like this. It is literally putting you into plantar flexion all day, right? Look at the picture of this shoe. You can see the plantar flexion from the side. Oh, don't rotate. That's fine, right? Look at that. That's literally the angle. Like, turn this into a skeleton and like label it, plantar flexion. Put it in an anatomy book as an example. That is going to tighten up your calf muscles. So now your body is like trying to squat, but the calf muscles are really tight. So you know what it does instead? It goes, well, I don't want to stretch the calves. You know what we'll do? We'll take some flexibility from somewhere else. So it turns the feet out, lets your knees cave in. And now it's like, yeah, you got the job done. You squatted, right? But we did it, and we're putting extra stress on, our knee joint, and we're putting extra stress on the ankle, right? Extra stress on certain muscles that are only going to further tighten up. And it leads to poor technique, which is also just going to make you less athletic. So when it comes to poor flexibility, summarizing everything that we're kind of talking about today, right? Our job is to identify the reason for that poor flexibility. That starts, by the way, with your general medical history questionnaire. It starts with the PAR-Q, not the PAR-Q, but it starts with like all the subjective stuff, right? Where you're like, hey, tell me about your lifestyle. You know, do you wear elevated heels at work? Seems like a weird question for a trainer to ask, right? You know, but again, we're trying to figure out like, where did this tight calf muscle come from? Like my dad, you guys should see my dad squat. It's great because he's a truck driver, right? He's an you know, long haul truck driver. So his like toes don't sit like this. Instead, it looks like this. Actually, a little bit like that. They both rotate out a little bit, but one side like way more than the other. And it's because like, yeah, he's using a clutch all day, you know? So we need to identify the reason. And then we look behind the posture as well. We look at the posture, we run it past our anatomy knowledge, right? Let's go to the NASM overhead. That overhead solutions table that's in your assessments chapter or, you know, available on NASM's website. And let's look at this little cheat sheet here, right? My dad, or, you know, the example we got in the PowerPoint here, we got the foot turnout. What's causing that? The probable overactive muscles that are really tight are going to be the soleus, right? It's that calf muscle. The calf muscle that's sort of at the bottom of your calf, right? It lives underneath the gastrocnemius, becomes exposed to the bottom. That's not what I want. Yeah, this little section down here. These are not my favorite pictures. I'm trying to get the version that so you can really see it. There we go. So there's your soleus, right? It lives underneath your main gastrocnemius, right? And then we get the gastrocnemius is doing this, right? Obviously, that's the big meaty calf muscle. You know, when you talk about like working your calves, right? Like trying to get it like big calves. Again, genetics as a reminder. But yeah, that's the upper portion, right? So the soleus is down here. You can see it beneath, like behind. Right? And then there's the gastrocnemius there. So both of those are really tight. And then remember that lateral knee muscle I told you about, right? That biceps femoris short head, that lateral knee rotator is causing those knees to cave in, right? It ties down here, goes around, and it's pulling on the fibula there, causing that rotation. So now we know what's tight. So guess what? We know exactly how to fix it. I'm going to go over to that OPT template I told you about, right? And I'm going to go SMR, lateral, we'll say calves, we'll say hamstrings, right? So I'm going to put in the coaching tips, special emphasis on the lateral aspect of the calves and the lateral aspect of the hamstring. So there we go. Let's say I do one set, 30 seconds each. Now all I got to do is follow it up with some stretches afterwards, right? So I foam roll it by, you know, and that's going to help me sort of work out any of those knots and sort of decrease some of the neuromuscular activity. We'll talk about why in just a moment, but I'm going to kind of shut the muscle down. And I'm going to follow it up with some stretches, right? Static, gastric, stretch. Static, soleus stretch. Static, biceps, femoris stretch. Now I will say this, guys. I just listed out the muscles as the name of those stretches. Your client is going to have no idea what that means. So if you've got like a better name for those, like, you know, for instance, the gastrocnemius stretch is known as a runner's stretch, right? If I look that up, I look up gastrocnemius stretch, right? You're going to see this one here. There we go. But I could also look up runner's stretch. You're going to see some kneelers here as well. But yeah, there's the runner stretch. Guess what? It's the same thing. So if you want to call it that, call it that. In your book, it's called a static gastrocnemius stretch. Yeah, so first things first, figure out the reason. Go into your overhead solutions table, figure out what's causing that. Then write it into a program, coach your client through that. Regress it if you need to, right? Like Arlene was asking about the QL stuff, right? And I was like, oh, well, you can do this version. If that's a little bit too tough, you can do this version. If that's too tough, you can do this version. Regress it if you have to, guys. Not everybody's going to be able to do every stretch. And then we are focusing on corrective exercise. When I say corrective exercise, I mean exercise that corrects your posture, right? We did one side of the joint. Tomorrow, we're going to start getting into, it's like, well, what if, remember, we said it was tight calf muscles that are causing this, right? So now I've addressed the tight stuff. What about all the weak stuff, right? Well, we're going to get into that in the next section. For today, we're just talking about the flexibility, but you do need to pull the muscle back in the other direction. So, yeah, practice your flexibility daily, guys. It should always be part of your warm up and your cool down. I really encourage everybody in this call to rethink how you do your warm-ups. A lot of times people are like, yeah, I got to warm up before I work out. And they just kind of like go through the motions and get it done. I really encourage you to pick your warm-ups very intentionally and then start practicing them every day. So you guys know how much I love like that A-B workout style. You guys know that I love the on a 7-day week here, right? Where it's like, you start Sunday is like a day of rest for me. It's how I like to do it. You don't have to do it that way, but I like to reset on Sundays. Upper, nope, that's not true. Look, oh, we used to just upper, lower, cardio, upper. Right. That's like my favorite sort of 7-day approach, right? 6 days with one off. Obviously, there's a million versions out there. But I really encourage you, like, get into an upper body flexibility routine that you can get used to. And it's like the same stretches you do in the same way every time you go into the gym. Start your workout with that. Be pumped to start your workout. Because, like, let's go back to Michael Phelps, right? He does that same number of arm slaps every time. He listens to the same track before he gets into the water. It goes all the way back to that imagery, visualization stuff we just talked about in exercise psych, right? We know that imagery is an effective tool. Treat your warm-up a little bit like imagery. It's practice. So you're going to get the increased mobility benefits. You're going to, fix your posture, and you're going to get into a mental state where you're like, now I'm ready to work out. And then come up with a lower body routine for your other day. And then just repeat that. Maybe put like half and half together on your cardio day and an upper, lower. Like, get into that swing of things. I write myself 3 warm-ups. Whenever I create like a new routine for myself, like I've got a new one starting next week, actually, right? So like whenever I start a new routine for myself, I write a new warm-up for myself, and I practice like getting better at it. I'm like, 2 sets of this, 1 set of that, whatever it happens to be. And I get through the swing and I flow through it as best I can. And I feel like I've accomplished something before I even start lifting. And then I get into the hard stuff. I really encourage you to start treating your warm-ups and your cool downs like that. So that's where we're going to sort of practice this flexibility stuff, right? And by the way, it doesn't have to be static stretches. It can be any version of stretches. So, all right. So we are going to have 3 types of flexibility training. Okay. This is just some terminology here. We have 3 types of flexibility training. We have corrective flexibility training, which is exactly like it sounds. You are correcting muscle imbalances. So you are approaching your flexibility training from the aspect of like, I'm going to fix some posture, right? We also have active flexibility, which you are going to notice is actually not in today's PowerPoint because we don't usually do it with youths for some of the reasons I mentioned kind of at the early part of this lesson. We'll get into it in a moment. And then we have functional flexibility. And functional flexibility is like high level flexibility where it's like, now that you can move your shoulder joint through a full range of motion, let's do it maybe with like a ballistic stretch, or let's do like an advanced, let's turn a strength calisthenic bodyweight exercise into a stretch, great. That's functional flexibility. That's like for high level functioning. So for youths, we're primarily focusing on this one and this one. Active flexibility isn't necessarily a thing. However, it is in your regular textbook, and I need you to know it, so we're going over it today. So, any questions before we jump into this long bit? All righty. So, if you have a client, so now we got to talk about the OPT model. I talk about the OPT model all the time. You know, it is the 3 levels and the 5 phases. For now, we don't have to worry about phases. We're just going to look at levels. So I've actually got a chart that I already made, which makes my life way easier because then I don't have to do paint. So ignore the cardio stuff. But for now, let's just look at the flexibility stuff here, right? Here's our 3 levels. Now in level 1, you'll notice we are going to apply that corrective flexibility. In level 2, that's phases 2, 3, and 4. We're going to apply the active flexibility. In level 3, we're going to apply that functional flexibility. So these are your different clients, right? These are the different clients that you've got out there. Some of your clients, it's their first month of training. So they're in the stabilization level. Some of your clients, they've been training for a little while. Maybe they're in the power level or somewhere within the strength level, right? Either way, we need to have some approach to flexibility. So for corrective flexibility, right, we are focusing on correcting muscle imbalances. That's why it's at the bottom of the OPT model. It's their foundation, right? I don't want to work with somebody who doesn't have the ability to move through a full range of motion if I'm making them do really advanced stuff. So I take that person, I'm like, we're going to get to that advanced stuff later. For now, let's fix some of your postural distortions. That way, when we get there, you're going to know how to do it properly. You'll be able to move the right way. So the idea here behind corrective flexibility, it's all about increasing your joints' range of motion. It's all about improving muscle imbalances. It's all about correcting what we call arthrokinematics, which is joint movement. I hate that word. Joint motion is literally less letters than arthrokinematics. Why do we have that word? And how do we do it? Well, it's think of it as like a toolbox, right? You have your corrective flexibility toolbox. If I've got a problem with my drywall, I'm gonna go get my drywall toolbox. I don't have a drywall toolbox, but I'm gonna go get all the stuff for fixing that, right? I'm not gonna go get my woodworking tools, right? I gotta use the right tools on the right client. Corrective flexibility. If I got a client with bad posture, this is my tool bag. Okay, so what tools are in that tool bag? Well, first thing we're going to see is self-myofascial release. So self-myofascial release is that trigger point therapy, right? The idea that like maybe there's an adhesion, right? If we look at what's called they call it the cumulative injury cycle. It kind of describes like how these injuries take place. Like I guarantee I'm going through a little bit of this right now myself, because like yesterday was just a very hard, stressful day. You know, lots of frisbee. The day before it also was like a lot. I sprained my ankle in the first game, which was frustrating. Like a really minor sprain, but like then proceeded to play for 5 more games. But this is the cumulative injury cycle. So we experience some type of tissue trauma, right? For me, it was stepping in a hole, the one hole in the entire field. And maybe or like doing a really intense like sporting event, right? Just working really, really, really hard. So what ends up happening is your body goes, injury, right? And it creates inflammation. Then those fibers that got damaged, right? Maybe you pulled a muscle, or what, there was just an excessive amount of lactic acid, caused a lot of like cellular damage. And your body's like, holy crap, like those fibers need a break. What'll happen is they'll contract. They'll sort of look like this. We look at like a, let's see here. Oh, that's not cool. I'm looking for a diagram here, not actual picture. No, it's blood vessels. Yeah, there we go. So what'll end up happening is like little fibers will all sort of bunch up. And those kind of stay like that. Those just kind of stay bunched up, right? You can literally think of it. I am going to open up paint. but just very briefly, you can kind of honestly think about it as like the fiber is supposed to run like this, but instead what it does is it goes, these parts are injured, whoop, and then it goes like that. And that way, like all this stuff is protected. But the problem is like it pulled this way in order for that to happen. So now this doesn't have to contract, but it's reducing our range of motion, right? So that's like what a spasm is. That's a muscle node or a muscle spasm. Arlene, you're very familiar with this, in the world of massage. But yeah, that's this. Oh, there we go. That's a much better picture. So you can even see like the fibers are going in the wrong direction. Right, they're literally just all bunched up. Back to my cumulative injury cycle. So then that muscle spasm causes the nodes I'm talking about. Those are the adhesions. Adhesions screw up the length of your muscle. So now you have altered neuromuscular control. Your brain's like, oh, I guess my muscle's only this long. I can't stretch it out any further than that. Okay, great. Good to know. And now you have a muscle imbalance because like, you have, where did that picture that I pulled up earlier go? There it is. You have this, right? There's your muscle imbalance. Now this muscle's like, no, I couldn't possibly stretch any further. I'm already at full length, when in fact, like it's just a bunch of adhesions that are shortening the muscle, right? It's like taking a shoelace, tying a bunch of knots in it, right? It's like, yeah, the shoelace is shorter. No, it's not. Just untie the knots, back to full length, right? So there we go. Like that's what causes the muscle imbalance. And then you know what happens when you have a muscle imbalance? You move the wrong way. You know what happens when you move the wrong way? You get injured. Oh no. And the cycle repeats, right? I woke up this morning and my hamstrings were so tight. I like rolled out of bed and I was like, oh, and it's like, it feels like my back's hurt. My back is fine, but my hamstrings are so tight that they're pulling on my back. And I need to, I'm going to work on it with the gun here in a little bit. So that is self myofascial release, right? For, like I said, I'm going to use the trigger point gun that I own, right? I could use a foam roller. I could use a lacrosse ball, right? Anything where I put pressure on those trigger points. And what's going to happen at first, remember when we talked about autogenic inhibition, where you put pressure on a node, you put pressure on a trigger point, you put pressure on a Golgi tendon organ, and it makes your muscle go, ah, and that's where you feel that pain. You're like, oh God. And eventually your body goes, all right, we thought the safest course of action was to contract this muscle. Now we think the safest course of action is to release the muscle. And that's why massage literally makes your muscles relax to full length. That is how it works. You are using autogenic inhibition. At first it hurts. You go to a massage therapist and like, if you're like me, I'm a baby. Like I really am. Like, it's funny that I work in this industry because like, I don't work in massage, but it's funny that I work in like all this. Cause like when I get a massage, if somebody's like, I'm like, ah. I really, Swedish is the gentle one, right?
Yeah.
You're a level below Swedish. That's for me.
That's funny. Most people get really frustrated with the lighter touch. Like when they come in and they get when people come in and they ask for lymphatic drainage and they realize it's just a feather light touch, they're like, what is that? No,
Like, give me deep tissue.
Most people want to feel it the next day, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah. No, me, I'm like, keep me away from deep tissue. Like, I've done it. Like, Mo has, like, there was a time I got kicked at Ultimate. This guy, like, it was just a bad play, but like his cleat went straight into my calf, and I could see the spasm. I woke up in the morning and I watched it like move, and I was like, oh, and I was like cramping up really bad. I was like limping around Sochi all day. So I went to Mo and I was like, I'm going to yell a lot of obscenities at you, but would you please like, and he was nice enough to just like work that thing out. And I was like, I'll kill you. I hate it. I was a real baby lion.
I always like a firm deep, it's more like a firm Swedish, like right before deep tissue.
Yeah. ask Mo about that day though. He laughs about it because like the filter just when I'm in pain it goes away. So yeah, so that's a trigger point, right? We're using self myofascial release. Now, self myofascial release is just like massage. Like we're talking about massage right now. I would call that, I don't know if this is actually even an official term. I would call that assisted myofascial release. It's somebody else doing it for you. But we can encourage our clients to use the self version, right? Right here. Right? I'm doing it myself. That's self myofascial release. I take a lacrosse ball, I place it here, I go up to a door, right? That's self myofascial release. Or if I sit my butt on a foam roller, that's self myofascial release. So there's other stuff out there. Don't get this mixed up. Remember, foam rolling is an example of self myofascial release. Self myofascial release is not always foam rolling. So it's gentle pressure on a Golgi tendon organ or an adhesion in order to perform that autogenic inhibition. Autogenic inhibition is the pressure on the Golgi tendon organ or pressure on a node that inhibits the overactive muscle spindles. The muscle spindles think that the safest course of action is just to stay contracted all day. We are encouraging it to let go, right? We're actually tricking it, honestly, more than anything. Like we're putting so much pressure that your nervous system goes, safest course of action is no longer to contract it. Now the safest course is to let it go. And then we just teach it like, oh, I guess I can stay this way, you know? So in a way, we're kind of fooling our muscles, but that's what autogenic inhibition is. So how do we take advantage of autogenic inhibition? We use statics. We use a self myofascial release, or we use static stretches. Static stretches also take advantage of autogenic inhibition. It's a little less active and a little more passive, but like you think of autogenic inhibition, right? I got a node, let's say I got a node right here. I poke it, right? That's autogenic inhibition because I'm inhibiting it by if I hold that poke for 30 seconds, right? And then it lengthens out. But guess what? I could also just take the fibers, you know, let's say I got some fibers here and I got some fibers here, and I just grabbed them end to end and just pulled them apart from one another. That's also going to create autogenic inhibition because now the node is being pulled apart. You're putting pressure on it like this instead of like that. Both are very effective, right? Both are going to work really well. This is why static stretches are used to improve mobility. And if I'm trying to improve mobility or fix a postural distortion, that is why we call it corrective flexibility, right? So your toolbox, let's go back to that toolbox analogy. If you've got a client in the stabilization level, your toolbox is going to be the corrective flexibility toolbox. The tools within that toolbox are self myofascial release and static stretches. Static stretches are definitely the best when it comes to improving full mobility. It allows the muscle to relax. It creates that extensibility, it creates elongation. And it's, what is a static stretch? It's what you think of when you think of a stretch, right? If I go like this, I'm stretching out my trap here. I'm not wearing a watch on this one. But I hold it, right? I just hold it for 30 seconds. That's a static stretch. So when you think of like, you know, a lot of times you hear people say like, oh, you shouldn't stretch before you work out, right? Because it makes your muscles weaker. Static stretches actually do. It's not a flat reduction in strength. Like, let me, you know, let's take a 1 rep max calculator here. Hopefully this works. My 1 rep max is 100 pounds. Calculate. Can I copy paste this? Yes, I can, I think. Oh, that is so perfect. Okay, so let's say my 1 rep max is 100 pounds. Well, you know what? My 2 rep max is about 95 pounds. My 3 rep max is about 90. My 4 to 5 rep max is about 85, right? So a lot of people think that when you do static stretches, it's just a flat reduction in strength. like where all of this, like 95, 90, let's say this becomes, I don't know, we'll say this becomes 90, and then this becomes 85, and then this becomes 80, and this becomes 75, right? Like people think that it works like that, right? I'm just going to delete the rest of this. Well, actually, no, I got to keep 65, 60, 55, 45. Like people think that like, oh, you do those big long static holds, it's going to do this to you. It's actually not how it works. What it does is it affects all of these, actually. It affects about the upper 30% of your strength more than anything. So, and these numbers are fake, by the way. I'm just making this up right now. But let's, instead of saying like, that was like a 5-pound reduction every time, right? That was like the same reduction for everything. What it would actually do is like, yeah, maybe you would lose 5 pounds on that 2-rep max. But the next one, instead of losing like another 5, you'd maybe only lose maybe 4 pounds worth of strength. So we'll say, instead of saying like taking this down to 85, we'll say maybe it's like actually more like 86. And then like this one, you know, maybe it goes down to like, instead of going down by another 5 or down by another 4, maybe this one goes down by 3 pounds. Right, so then it's like 83, and then this one would go down by like 2 pounds, so maybe like 81. Maybe this, you only lose a pound off this one, so instead of 75, it becomes, you know, 70. Oh, I did my math wrong. God dang it. Oh wait, no, I got it right. So it becomes this, right? So you can see like it doesn't actually affect it. What it does is it affects the highest intensity a lot, and then it loses how much it affects you as we go, which is why we actually do this in the stabilization phase. Because guess what? The heaviest you're ever going to lift in the stabilization phase, when you look at the rest of the rules, is 70% of your 1-rep max, which doesn't really get affected by static stretches. So it's a really great place to place them. And that's why, again, the stabilization levels are foundation. Does that make sense, everybody? I got a little in the weeds with that math stuff, but but yeah, it would affect your 1-rep max a lot, and it would affect the rest of it very little. So when people say like don't stretch before you work out because it makes you weaker, what they should be saying is don't do static stretches before you do max strength lifting because it makes you weaker. But obviously that's a much more complicated sentence, so we kind of boil it down. This is why I don't get along with the Athlete X guy. I think that that's what he does. He like boils stuff down into very digestible bits of information, but it's often misinterpreted. Shots fired. So how do we do it? What are our rules? Well, we're gonna do about 1 to 2 sets, and we're gonna hold them each for about 30 seconds, and we're gonna use it after we always do it foam rolling first. Always want to foam roll first, guys, before you do your stretches, no matter what type of stretches they are, because foam rolling is all about like untying those knots. It also doesn't have the reduction in strength like static stretches do. So we start with that because like it unties the knots. I always use the same analogy when I'm talking about this, but picture like a nylon shoelace, right? If you pulled it end to end, it's a little springy, you know, your muscles are kind of springy. Now, if you took that shoelace and you tied a knot in it and you pulled it end to end, it would still be springy. It would still elongate, but it'll never be as long as it can be until you take that knot out of there, right? So we start with the foam rolling first to get the knot out, then we stretch it out afterwards. And that'll get all the wrinkles from that knot sort of smoothed out, right? So always foam roll first, stretch second. And it should be avoided. You can see we put it in here, right? You should avoid static stretches before maximal effort or explosive activities. That is not the stabilization phase. Stabilization phase is really gentle, right? So we'll come back to the PowerPoint here in a moment, but the next bit of information is not in the PowerPoint. We need to talk about the strength level. So now the question becomes, what if you are lifting really heavy? So there, oh, by the way, and there's our, like I said, 1 to 2 sets, right? We picked 1 to 2 sets here. So we picked one, 30 seconds each. We did SMR first for the calves and the hamstrings, and then we followed up with one calf stretch, two calf stretch, and another hamstring stretch. Cool, cool. That's going to fix that feet turnout problem that we were talking about earlier. Now, if my client had an anterior pelvic tilt, I would pick totally different exercises. You know, it'd be a different client. But what if, so that's a stabilization level client, right? But what if my client's in the strength level? What if I've been training this client for like, 4 weeks now, and I want to move them into the strength level? What if I want to, like, they're like, well, I'm here to put on muscle, right? And so I was like, okay, great. You want to put on muscle? Let's start with let's build your foundation of posture first. Make sure you're ready. Then we'll lift you into the heavy stuff. So we move them from stabilization into hypertrophy. We move them into the muscular development. Let's blow them up. You know what I mean? So now I'm going to focus on. Oh yeah, not in the PowerPoint. I'm going to focus on what we call active flexibility. So go to the notes. Active flexibility, which is used in the strength level, phases 2, 3, or 4, right? You can see this is kind of all encompassing, right? This is flexibility that's designed to still improve joint range of motion, but it does it through repetition. And instead of using that autogenic inhibition, which was that, like, remember, sustained pressure where you put pressure and then your body's like, and it just kind of lets go, right? That's autogenic inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition is different, right? Remember how I said, if I contract my bicep, my tricep lets go. If I contract my tricep, my bicep lets go. That's how your nervous system is organized. I contract my point to the wrong side. I contract this part of my neck, this side lets go. Contract this side of my neck, this side lets go. These muscles are antagonists, right? Muscles can only pull. So what would happen if I had a muscle over here and no muscle over here? I'd pull. I'd be like, I don't know. I'd be stuck. I'd have to, like, lean over every time to get my head to go back the other way. So your nervous system's organized that way. And so what it has is it has an automatic signal. If we look at, like, got the wrong muscle. If we look at how reciprocal inhibition works, remember how I talked about stretch reflexes in our nervous system lecture? We talked about how, like, a signal comes in, right? Like, here's the doctor's hammer, and they smack that patellar tendon. So receptors go to the brain and say, we got smacked. Ah! So what it'll do is it sends one signal down to the quadriceps muscle to kick the quad forward. Meanwhile, a second signal goes to the hamstring that tells the hamstring, hey, relax for a second. The quad's got to do it work, right? So it shuts the hamstring down and allows the quad to do its work. And it kicks forward, right? So I threw my arm forward. Does anybody remember the Looney Tunes commercial where it's like, I think it's Bugs, he's at the doctor's office and they smack him in the knee and his ears? like the wrong muscle keeps, it, like, hits him in the knee and his arm goes up like this. And it hits him in the knee and his ear flops. He's like, oh, you got bad reflexes. Anyway. So yeah, so that's, you smack the patellar tendon and your quadricep will contract. Meanwhile, the hamstring will relax. That's the inhibitory. That's reciprocal inhibition. One muscle reciprocates the other, right? So we see here, if I'm in this position like this, right, and I contract my tricep, right, that will tell my bicep to let go. That's reciprocal inhibition. It's like, oh, after you, sir. Oh, thank you, sir. Right, you're reciprocating. So that's what we're actually going to use in the active flexibility style of training. So if we look at our notes here, active flexibility is designed to improve your joint range of motion through repetition, and it uses reciprocal inhibition. So we're still going to foam roll first. So this is a new tool bag, right? We grab our active flexibility strength level tool bag, right? So we're going to do active isolated stretches, but we're going to start with foam rolling still. We're still, or SMR still, right? We're still going to sort of, mash up those those nodes and kind of try to get everything to relax. But then we're going to follow it up with an active stretch. Now, an active stretch, honestly, looks exactly like a static stretch. You just don't hold it. So if I was trying to stretch out my traps, right, let's say I've got really tight neck muscles, I'd pull it over like this. And I would hold for 30 seconds if I were a stabilization client, because I would want to do a static stretch. But if I'm a client who is in the strength level and I don't want to lose strength in my traps because maybe I'm doing shrugs today. You guys know how I feel about shrugs. I'd probably do it like this, actually. I'd probably pull it over, 1, 2, and then I would let go. I'd pull it over, 1, 2, and I would let go. So I'm taking an active approach to my flexibility, right? I'm actually focusing on contracting this neck muscle to drive my head away, in the hopes that by contracting this, my nervous system is sending one signal that says contract here and another signal that says relax here. So I'm using reciprocal inhibition to get my muscle to relax. Or I would squeeze my tricep to get my bicep to relax. I would squeeze my upper back to get my chest to relax, right? So if I'm trying to get the brain to recognize that squeeze, I need to actively squeeze it a couple times. I need to do some reps. So what we're going to do is we're using that reciprocal inhibition. It's the contraction of an agonist to decrease the neural drive of its antagonist. I'm contracting one muscle to get the opposite muscle, it has to be the opposite muscle, to let go, right? So I'm going to do 1 to 2 sets, just like I did up here. But instead of a 30-second hold, I'm going to do a 1 to 2 second hold for 8 to 10 repetitions. So let's go back to our example program that fixes the foot turnout client from earlier. We're going to do the same foam rolling techniques, right? Because I'm still trying to mash up those same, nodes and stuff. But instead of doing a static gastrocnemius stretch, I'm going to do an active gastrocnemius. Instead of a static soleus, I wrote the word static because I said it. Instead of a static soleus stretch, I'm going to do an active soleus stretch. Instead of a static biceps femoris, I'm going to do an active biceps femoris stretch. Again, 1 to 2 sets. So I'm just going to pick 1 this time. And on my duration, I'm going to do a 1 to 2 second hold each rep. Okay. And then over here in the coaching tips, I'm going to say 8 to 10 repetitions each. These are all single leg exercises. So I'm going to say each leg. Right. So 1 to 2 second holds, 8 to 10 reps. And that way I'm telling my nervous system, hey, contract this, which will in hopes teach my nervous system to relax that. Pull that, let go of that, right? That's the sort of agonist-antagonist approach. And what's great about that, what's really great about active isolated stretches, guys, is it doesn't reduce your strength. We are worried about like that reduction in strength that we just talked about. So again, when somebody says don't stretch before you work out because it makes you weaker, right? Or it makes you less explosive. When you hear people say that, static stretches make you less explosive. Active stretches don't really have that effect. So if I was lifting, let's say I'm going to the gym and I'm going to try and break my 1 rep max. I'm going to try to set a new record, right? Great. I should still stretch beforehand. I just need to pick the right types of stretches. And that's going to be active isolated. Questions? Comments? We go on level 2. All right, let's look at level 3 here. So back to the OPT model, right? Let's say our client keeps training, they move into the power level. Well, now we're going to focus on, we're going to go grab our functional flexibility tool bag. That's going to be foam rolling and dynamic stretches. So what the heck is a dynamic stretch? Well, functional flexibility consists of dynamic stretches that mimic the movements of everyday life and just naturally draw the muscle through your complete range of motion. So this might be like doing like a lunge with twist. Let's say you had a client warming up like this, doing a lunge with a twist. Oh, don't coach, just give me the demo. Right? Now, you might not think of that as a stretch in the traditional sense, but I mean, it is. It's drawing the muscle through a full range of motion, right? Or let's say it's a lunge with overhead reach. So that works. Let's put them together. So he's lunging and then he reaches, right? That is a dynamic stretch. Twist, pull. Lunge, twist, pull. Or maybe it's like a dynamic chest stretch. Right? Maybe it's arm circles, right? Oh, there you go. Oh, never mind. That's not him. There he is. I knew Googling Athlenex would pull it up. This is a really good one, right? Up and overs. If I can skip this head. So this is a really good one for the shoulders, right? All the way up, all the way over. Now, I shouldn't do this if I don't already have proper extensibility. I should have already done plenty of static stretching in the months prior and plenty of active stretching in the months prior before I actually do this, because this is a very advanced stretch, right? But that's what we mean when we say dynamic flexibility. They're usually very functional movements. A lot of times they're body weight calisthenic exercises, like a push-up with a rotation, right? That stretches out my chest, but like, you know, it's very dynamic, right? These are functional movements that sort of just naturally draw us through a full range of motion. Now, you shouldn't be doing this if you don't have good compensation in all three planes, right? You should be able to move sagittally, effectively, frontally, effectively, and transverse without injuring yourself. If your client can't move through those ranges of motion effectively, dynamic stretching is probably not appropriate for them. This is why it is at the top of the staircase here, right? It is for advanced clients. So we're going to start with self-myofascial release, just like we did in our other two levels. But instead of doing like our repetitions where we held them for 1 to 2 seconds, right? Instead, we're going to pick 3 to 10 exercises, put them together as a circuit. We'll do 1 to 2 sets of about 10 to 15 repetitions. So maybe like if I'm doing like a heavy barbell squat for the day, I might do some dynamic like body weight squats or like a goblet squat. She's doing a prisoner squat, right? Hands behind the head, squatting down into a full range of motion. Now you might be thinking it's like, isn't that a strengthening exercise? It was at one point in this person's journey, but now it's a stretch for them, you know? So that's our dynamic flexibility approach. So I go back to my little example program that we're writing here with our foot turnout client. Let's say they move another 30 days forward and they're in the power level now, still starting with the SMR, you know, not changing any of that. But now we're going to do a dynamic gastrocnemius stretch, dynamic soleus stretch, and a dynamic biceps femoris stretch. This time, let's give them 2 sets. Oops. And let's have them do, you know, we're supposed to do maybe 10 to 15 repetitions. Let's have them do like 15 each. 15 each. And let's give them like 10 each here. A little bit tougher. Right. So there we go. I picked 3 exercises, 15 reps each. And that's going to be like my warm up for my client. What's great about this is it's actually going to kind of get their cardio going a little bit. And sort of get their heart rate up. So now I'm also like warming the body up, literally. This is where, if you look, there's a million of them out there, guys. There are a million dynamic warm-ups out there. But let's just see somebody who, let's hopefully just a follow along that will actually move quickly after Whole Foods goes away. That Sherman Oaks Whole Foods isn't even open. So there he goes, right? He is going to do, he does a little bit of hamstring stretch there. Now he does a little bit of a cobra stretch, right? So now he's getting his hamstrings and his low back stretched out. Now he's going to do a squat with some arm swings, right? Gets the hips open, gets the lats open, gets the hips open, gets the chest open, right? Sort of warming all that up there. Going into some leg swings. There are that's actually really great. There are a bajillion dynamic warm-ups out there, guys. You can put one together for your client that makes sense. So flexibility training, right? Obviously, we're going to have a major impact on our youths by taking them through this, but obviously we'll also have a major impact on our adults. It's really important to maintain that good flexibility and drive those muscles through a full range of motion. Because if we don't, we have altered flexibility, it leads to altered movement patterns. Altered movement patterns lead to some type of overuse injury. Overuse injuries cause inflammation and spasms in nodes, which causes further altered neuromuscular control and causes more injuries. So we're going to focus primarily with youths on corrective flexibility and functional flexibility. That's static stretches and dynamic stretches. The active flexibility, the reason we don't do that, kids don't really have like a very good contraction. Remember, they don't have a lot of type 2 muscle. So they're not very good at contracting their muscles. So instead, we focus primarily on like those styles. So if you had a client who was in the strength level, like a youth who's maybe doing strength endurance or something like that, you'd probably just focus on corrective or maybe some functional stretches at your discretion. 1 to 2 sets of SMR for either of them. And then you're either going to do static stretches, like I said, with stabilization clients, or functional flexibility, dynamic stretches with power level clients. And that's sort of our first approach to program design. You can see like we've got 3 different warm-ups here for the same client, depending on where they are in their timeline, you know, or maybe they're 3 different clients and one of them's, but they all have tight calves, you know. Different workouts for different folks, depending on how I'm training them, right? The reason I didn't do static stretches for this middle month and this last month is because that's primarily focusing on type 2 muscle fibers. I don't want to deactivate their muscles before I try to strengthen those muscles, right? I want to keep those muscles nice and active. So instead, I do the active flexibility, or I do the functional flexibility. And that's it, guys. Questions? How are y'all feeling? That makes sense? I see a thumbs up. All righty. Cyrus, how are you feeling about all this? Did that's your first toe in the water when it comes to program design? How you feeling so far?
All right, I guess.
Yeah.
Everything's new to me, that's why.
What's that?
Everything's new to me. So.
Yeah, totally. Here's the thing. Here's how I always like to tell people. This is the OPT template, and this is the OPT model. And it's just, have you ever done paint by numbers?
Yes.
It's just like paint by numbers. This is your instructions, right? And here's where you're going to fill it in. So it gets better and better the more we do. We revisit this all the time. Now, Mir, this is your last time in a program design class with me. Yeah. The goal is I want you to be a little bored by today. Because you've heard it this is your 4th time, right? You're feeling pretty confident, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know, I know that there's like a lot more different stretching to learn, and
there is some. So outside of the way NASM approaches stuff, there is definitely some other techniques out there that I do like better in a lot of ways. For instance, like, you know, I spent all day talking about how static stretches reduce your strength a little bit if you do them. A lot of evidence suggests that if you follow those static stretches up with dynamic stretches, it turns them right back on.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
like,
makes sense though. That makes sense. But yeah, because sometimes I do like dynamic stretching. Like if I'm gonna do legs, you know, I'll keep the hold short.
Yeah.
It usually works. Like everything really works, bro. You just gotta remember what everything is called.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's sometimes the hardest part too. Flashcards for that stuff.
Not always, because I know what they're called, but I'm learning what they do.
That's fair too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say also flashcards for that version. Because do you guys want to know the best way to do flashcards? I used to do this when I was in school. So let's say you got like a definition you're trying to memorize. And like this is the front, and then this is the back, right? So what I used to do, and I don't know why other people didn't do this, but and normally like where you see people like do flashcards, right? They're like, let's say it's the agonist or knee extension, right? So that's going to be your quadriceps, right? Your quadriceps are in charge of knee extension, right? So what you do is you put the correct answer on the back, right? I would always see people do this where they put it in the middle of the flashcard. Don't do that. Put this at the bottom, put this at the top. It still functions the same way, but now you can practice it both directions. And when you're done practicing it, if you happen to be in a class that lets you use your notes, right? All you have to do is glue all your flashcards into a notebook and move this over to the other side. And now you have the definition and it all on one page. That got me through college. Way easier.
I think today I'm gonna spend the whole day just rewriting all the notes that you give us printed out in like tiny little letters.
Right. Well, remember, you're not allowed to bring those with you.
Put it into like a pack of gum or something.
Yeah, I don't think you can even get a pack of gum in there. They do make
no.
you leave everything. You don't even allowed to bring your keys in the room with you.
We're all sneaking.
Dude, true story. True story. I had there's a student who was an ex-Sochi student who wasn't one of mine. So like I had started at Sochi. I'd worked there for I think 3 months at this point. It was definitely, I was not even in 6 months. And this person like comes in and I was like, hi, how are you? And I was just like greeting them and I was like, oh, you're a graduate, cool, and like hearing all stuff. And she was like, great, can I get your card? And I was like, oh, we don't give us cards, but here. And I gave her my email, my contact info. And she emailed me. I still have it somewhere, actually. I should show you guys because it's very funny. But she emailed me and was like, hey, I still haven't taken my test yet. And I know it's your guys' job to make sure that we pass. If I wore like Bluetooth earbuds, would you like pass me the answers in the test? And I was like, what? Or she was like, or do you know a student who would maybe look like me that could use my ID and go in? And I was like, yeah, I was like, you clearly never had me as a teacher because like not big on cheating. Like, we laughed about it so hard. Like we used to do a weekly meeting back then. And I was like, I like printed out the email and I was so excited. I like had it really close to my chest because it didn't want anybody to see it. I was like, for the meeting today, I got something to share. Like I was so stuffed.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, but hey, how many it costs money to take the test, right?
No, it's already included in your stuff. We pay for that. However, if you don't pass the first time, you get a free retest. So we pay for that as well. But if you don't pass a second time and you go take it a third time, I think it's $99, or at least it was $99 the last time I checked.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah. Don't worry about that.
Oh, bro, I'm gonna try to take the test as many times.
Right. And you will get a practice test when you get your account. You'll get a 100 question start to finish test that will shuffle. that you can practice a bunch, and that really helps too.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Brad, we're seeing you tomorrow, right? In person at Sochi?
Oh, it's not tomorrow. I think it's next Tuesday, because today's only day 4. Hold on a second. Let me check the schedule, Cyrus. What's that?
I'm in Arizona right now.
Oh, I was wondering. You've got a different name on your.
It's my brother's computer.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One second, Cyrus. Let me check the schedule here, and I sent it out. Did I put it in here like I'm supposed to? I did. Yeah, sorry. Next Tuesday, 1 week from today.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
I got you. Thank you.
Yep, 29th, not the 22nd. All right, fellas.